Welcome to TrisagionFilms. I'm Father Panayiotis, and here I am with Father Stephen, and today we're going to discuss a very important topic. What will it take for the Orthodox to unite to the Roman Catholics? Is that possible? And what are the problems with it? And what are the things that one side or the other are completely responsible for to do in order to achieve that goal? And the reason that we're talking about this today is because in Greece, in Cyprus, maybe in other Orthodox countries, there is today a big question whether this is actually happening. There are people who are concerned if the Orthodox bishops will betray the Orthodox faith by submitting to the Pope. And that's really a very serious consideration, whether anybody is trying to do that. And there is a lot of misinformation and accusations going on the internet that we want to make sure that we clarify as much as we're able today. And the other side is that in places like the United States, there are people who want the union of the two churches because they are married as a Roman Catholic and an Orthodox, and they go to both churches, and they wish maybe that the union between the two churches will happen so that they can receive Holy Communion in both churches. And the question is this going to happen anytime soon? Is it possible? What will it take for it to happen? And so, Father Stephen, let's begin with what are the obstacles to this, all right? Because there were efforts in the past to do this, and we know the biggest one that we know of and everybody talks about is the Council of Florence, where the Emperor John Palaiologos VIII and all the bishops of the East came to beg the Bishop of Rome to send troops to Constantinople to protect the city from the invading Turks, and they were willing to do anything to save Constantinople at the time, and whatever was left of the Roman Empire of the East, or as people call it today, the Byzantine Empire. But that failed, and in my opinion, it failed on both sides. Even though the Orthodox were willing to bend over backwards, in other words, the Roman Catholics did not contribute any concessions because they found them weak, they found them in a very difficult position, and they demanded absolute submission to the Pope and to all the claims of the Pope. And it was Mark Evgenikos, the Bishop of Ephesus, who stood in the way, and his theology that he articulated at the time is really having a big effect on the dialogue that's going on with the Roman Catholics in the last 60 years. And so, Father Stephen, give us that those points that are very significant in this dialogue and in this difficulty, and let's go from that, and then we'll see where we go.
Well, I think the first thing we need to speak of is the fact that there was no real desire for union among the Orthodox bishops at Florence.
Yeah.
This was a political thing that was forced upon them.
Yeah.
The Orthodox
By
bishops...
the emperor, primarily.
By the emperor.
Yeah.
The bishops found themselves in an entrapped situation. The Pope kept them there for a long time. They really couldn't leave. In other words, Rome had absolutely nothing to lose at Florence. Nothing. They didn't have to negotiate, really. They didn't have to give in any of their main points. The Orthodox were in a position where they were quite literally, some might say about that time, fighting for their lives because of all the political incursions at the time. And so what were they supposed to do? Now, I think most of them gave in. I know that when
under the pressure.
Yes, under the great pressure that was there. St. Mark didn't. Many of the bishops had to flee for their lives when they returned home. And St. Mark, he came to that famous thing that we see inscribed in our iconography, which talks about them not only being schismatics, but heretics as well. And that's remained there for all of this time. So Mark was the only one who seemed competent in, really dialoguing, if you will.
Theological dialogue,
Right. And in fact, when the Pope, in the end, when he asked them, he said, who signed? And they read the list of names of bishops that signed, and then he said, what about Mark? And they said, no, he did not sign. And the Pope said, well, then we've accomplished nothing. And so that sort of sets the groundwork for everything. And I think if we're going down and making a list, and it's tricky to make a list because many of these issues, I think from an Orthodox standpoint, are equally significant. But if we were going to make a list, I would think that the supremacy and infallibility of the Pope would be at the very top of it, because so much of what keeps the Roman Catholic engine going these days spills over from that. So it's a difficult thing for us to
Are those two doctrines made into dogma for the Roman Catholics? I believe by the First
Vatican Council in 1870.
You have the text. Can we read it? Because I think people need to know that there are some clear, strong and powerful differences that need to be reconciled, which I don't know how we can do that. But let's hear what the First Vatican Council said about primacy first.
Well, he says, they say, we teach and declare that by the appointment of our Lord, the Roman Church possesses a superiority of ordinary power over all other churches. This power of jurisdiction of the Roman Pontiff is episcopal, ordinary, and immediate over the pastors and the faithful, both separately and collectively. That pretty much sums it up.
Every Christian, basically.
Everything. Every single Christian. But then we go on. If anyone denies that the Roman Pontiff, when he speaks ex cathedra, possesses the divine infallibility, let him be anathema.
Wow.
So this is basically, if we looked at the church in terms of the ancient patriarchates, and the Roman being first among equals back then, this is basically a scenario where 1/5 of the pentarchy has gone off and now is declaring itself infallible without input from any of the others.
Officially and dogmatically. And anybody who rejects it, let it be anathema on them.
Yes, which is, of course, cut off
completely
from the church, and one would think salvation as well.
Anathema is includes salvation.
Exactly. So the structure of the Roman Church is so different from us now.
But it has been for the last at least 100 years, since the time of Charlemagne, when he is really the architect of what is Roman Catholicism in so many different ways, and we cannot go over all those things, including maybe not infallibility itself at the time, but superiority of the Bishop of Rome over all other Christians and all other churches, and submission to the Holy Roman Emperor as their emperor and not any other emperor. Things like that, which Charlemagne did when he created the so-called Holy Roman Empire and created the Roman Catholic Church as it is
Right.
And
right.
then he imposed several things on the areas that he controlled, which was most of Western Europe. Celibate clergy, for example, which was a major change in the church, because there was never a time when celibacy was enforced on every priest.
No, and we know even in the West, up to the year 1000, we still hear of married priests.
Even after that,
So it took a while.
Yeah, it took a couple of centuries for that to become universal in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, there was no effect because they were separated by that time. And then there was the issue of the filioque, which the Carolingian theologians, they were the theologians of Charlemagne, Charles the Great, they imposed on the Western Church again. Although the bishop that crowned him as Holy Roman Emperor, Leo III, who was the last Roman bishop to be in the See of Rome, after that there were Frankish bishops and then all kinds of things, including Germans in more recent times.
Right. And even the filioque was done simply to counteract Arianism in the western side of the church.
Yeah, in Spain only.
In Spain
only.
Council of Toledo. Right.
The Franks found it there, and they thought it was the appropriate thing. And not being good theologians, not being able to read the Fathers of the East, that they were separated from, and not knowing Greek, of course, to read them, because there were no translations. There was no education in Europe at the time. The culture and the civilization of Europe was completely destroyed by the barbarians, by the Germanic tribes, Goths, Visigoths, Lombards, and all of the others who came in wave after wave and eliminated all sign of civilization in Europe for over 1,000 years. Because we don't get them to read the Fathers until during the Renaissance, believe it or not. Okay? And they don't know about philosophers and other theologians until after they discover Aristotle, starting with Thomas Aquinas. They don't even know Plato, and they discover him when he's brought in by the group that came to Florence, by the one philosopher who was a Platonist. He established in Europe, in Italy, the first Platonic school where Plato was being taught. And then after that, you get all of the arts from the East as the Turks advance and destroy civilization in the East. You get all these theologians, you get philosophers, you get artists who flee to the West, and then you get the Renaissance, right? So that's when civilization comes back to the West, which is amazing, really. I mean, if you think, and nobody talks about this.
No.
You don't hear about this ever.
No.
But there was 1,000 years of darkness in Europe. 1,000 years of darkness, almost, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, the joke has always been, while they were in the West, tearing beef off a stick with their teeth, in the East, they were using forks.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more civilized development going on.
Yeah, but they didn't even have any science. They didn't know anything about what the Greeks had already done over 1,000 years before, about, say, the anatomy of the human being, say the different things that they understood, the stars and the moon and things like that. They were putting to death Galileo for thinking that the earth moves around the sun instead of the other way around. And this was after the Renaissance, not before the Renaissance. Okay? So we're talking about backwardness of the highest grade.
Severe, very severe.
Very severe. And while in the East, the empire was a continuation of the Greco-Roman civilizations that kind of melded together and produced science. They produced amazing architecture. They produced, which eventually began to happen in the West as well, as we see after the Renaissance. So
because of this severity that we have between the two,
Yeah.
In the West, their view of church structure and how the church actually works started to change a lot. In the East, you had the other patriarchates that had to deal with one another all the time,
Yeah.
sometimes competitively. They weren't that far apart, and the whole notion of what we would today call the conciliarity of the church disappeared in the West.
Yeah.
It was something that became much more top-down, much more rigorous in that regard. And I think we have to say, too, that as Westerners living here, we inherit a lot of that thinking.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get around sometimes.
Another thing that I wanted to point out is that the Carolingian theologians, again, changed what was happening in the Western Church with Holy Communion. And this became an issue later when they were talking to each other, and it was about the unleavened bread. In the East, leavened bread was used, and is still used until today. And in the West, it stopped to being used after the year 800, as the Frankish theologians decided that the Last Supper was a meal celebrating the Passover. Therefore, it had to be unleavened bread. So from now on, we're going to use unleavened bread. And they ignored what was happening before. And this was discovered by the Eastern theologians in the Eastern Church later, much later, 200 years later, in 1054, when they first had a theological communication back and forth, which brought about what we call the Great Schism. But the actual schism did not happen in 1054. It began much earlier with the division, the political division, because of the invasion and destruction of Europe by the barbarians. And then in the year 800, with Charlemagne and his theologians, and then it continued to develop in that direction until finally they discovered that they were so different that they couldn't even talk to each other in a way that they can comprehend each other. So it's deeper. The split of the church is much deeper, and it took many more centuries. It's not one event that happened at one time, but many things that happen over.
And St. Photius pointed out a lot of these things.
Yeah. Well, the first time that the Easterners realized that there were some differences was with Photius, who noticed that the Rome was overreaching into Constantinople, trying to depose the bishop and remove him from
with Nicholas.
His place. And then they discovered the filioque as well, which what we call the Eighth Ecumenical Council, which was initially accepted by Rome, and later, several years later, they decided to reject it, condemned the filioque. It didn't condemn the Church of Rome, but it condemned the filioque as an addition to the creed that did not belong there and needed to be removed so that the balance of the relationship of the persons of the Trinity won't be affected. They don't need to rewrite all their theology, their Christology, their Trinitarian theology to accommodate one word that somebody added by accident, basically, or mistakenly.
Right.
For a good reason, but yeah.
For a good reason. But then you have to theologically justify it going forward.
Yeah, and there was no way.
That's when the dichotomy begins after that.
There was no way, and to this day, and having been to Roman Catholic theological schools and having debated this issue with professors and others, Roman Catholic theologians and historians acknowledge today that the filioque doesn't belong there. But the Vatican is not willing to acknowledge it. So that's another topic that we may want to talk about.
Well, they acknowledge it, but they seem confused by it, put it that way. Because in the Eastern Catholic churches, they allow them to get rid of
the Uniate churches.
The Uniate churches, right.
Yeah.
They allow them to get rid of the filioque. they say, which shows you in the hierarchy of things where those other things fall.
Yeah.
Because again, the
It's not
supremacy,
so important for them.
right, supremacy of the Pope is at the top. Filioque, it's secondary
Yeah.
to them, because they say, well, you can, if you don't want to use it, that's fine. Whatever you've been doing all of these years, which then makes you think, what do they really think about the filioque and its importance?
And why do they insist on holding on to it? That's my
Yeah.
other question. When it becomes an obstacle to unity, theological
Right.
unity with the East,
It would be
why are they insisting
something
on it?
simple to remove.
It's very simple to remove.
Yes.
Oh, one word of the Pope, the way he functions, and you can remove it.
Yeah.
So why don't they do it? I don't know. I really don't know. I never was able to understand this.
Well, again, I think it's because since all of this happened, they have had to theologically justify its inclusion. And it's very difficult to make that justification for it and at the same time to offer an equal justification to get rid of it. In other words, a creed without it. Because one of them talks about the procession of the Holy Spirit eternally from the Father and the Son, something which is the dual procession, which does subordinate the Holy Spirit. You can't get around that. And the other says that he proceeds eternally from the Father, but he is sent temporally by the Son. So, which is it? Are both acceptable? In their mind, who knows? Who knows?
Anyway, we can go into that again deeply, but we don't really have time. We know that we want to acknowledge and kind of let our viewers know that
it's an issue.
It's an issue. It's a major issue for us.
Yeah.
They don't care, and yet they're not willing to remove it.
Right.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing.
Yeah, very true.
Maybe in the future they will decide, but then they will have to admit that all these years they made a mistake, including it. All right. Okay.
Maybe so, but again, when we talk about the development of doctrine in the Roman Catholic Church, it doesn't really matter what, in their minds, what the church thought back in the year 1000, for instance, because since then they have developed their doctrine, and so the latest thing that they have is going to be the doctrine. So that makes it difficult for us to talk about when we meet with them and say, let's go back to the point when the two sides were united, and they will say, well, no, we've moved beyond that.
Yeah.
So we don't need to do that.
And that is because of say it again.
The development of
the
doctrine.
development of doctrine,
Development
which
of
is
doctrine.
acceptable to them,
Right.
and it's not acceptable
It's not
to
to
us.
us.
Yeah.
It's not to us.
There is no development of doctrine, especially with regard to Christ and the Holy Spirit and the Father, or other
Right.
theological issues that are really settled by the early ecumenical councils. There is no development of that. Anybody who
whatsoever.
disagrees is out.
Right. And there was a development for us even back then.
Yeah.
I mean, it was simply something that we had to uncover whenever Christ was being attacked in one way or the other.
Yep.
So we weren't developing anything.
That's correct. We didn't see it as a development even then.
No.
The fathers saw it as a crystallization of the faith into these things, and nobody can change these from now on. And council after council verified the previous decisions,
Right.
and those were solidified as they are. Okay.
Right. So maybe they could get beyond the filioque if they keep developing it. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Well, the developments
You know?
of the developments that Vatican I created about the final dogmatic acceptance of the position of the Bishop of Rome, that was really a final thing that was kind of in the background. They were
Right.
claiming it without making it official,
Right.
and that's when they made it official. And now what they're going to do, go back on that and say that we reject the First Vatican Council, they were in error. Then they were in error about
Right.
the infallibility of the Pope.
If they do that, then the whole edifice collapses.
That's right. And
That's the whole thing.
the infallibility of the Pope was used by the Pope to declare the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary as a dogma.
1854.
Well, it was in the 1950s that they made
Well,
it.
the Assumption was in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Immaculate Conception was 1854.
Okay, and they made it official.
And they,
At
yeah,
that time,
yeah,
yeah.
and then they came back to that, and that was, yeah.
Very good. So, So now we have infallible pronouncements that are really based on wrong theological assumptions, because the Immaculate Conception dogma in the Roman Church is based on another misunderstanding and difference from us, which is about the guilt of Adam being transmitted through every father to his children. And then the question about the Virgin Mary, which caused them to create the Immaculate Conception theologically, was, so if Mary's parents, her father, made her sinful and guilty for the sin of Adam through the original sin transmitted from him, then how can she have sinned and give birth to God? So they created a doctrine which they made into a dogma that infallibly, that she did not inherit the sin of Adam. She was cleansed from the sin of Adam. She was immaculately conceived. She wasn't cleansed. She was immaculately conceived, which means that she's not in union with all of us in her humanity. She's different.
Yes.
Okay?
Different.
Now, in the East, the concept of original sin, as the West has it, is not acceptable. The fathers of the Church never understood the fall as creating human beings that are guilty of the sin of Adam. What they understood is that the sin of Adam created the fallen condition in which we today are in, and that fallen condition leads us to sin, but we don't inherit the sin of anybody. That would be very unjust by God to actually hold anybody sinful for the sin of somebody else. I mean, even modern judges won't do something like that. They won't arrest you because your father did something wrong, right? And condemn you to death because he killed somebody, let's say. So how can God do anything like that? It's really...
It's all tied together.
Yeah.
It's all tied together.
So all of these things are tied together, but it's error leading to error, and they're made into dogma. Dogma has already been developed. It's done. It's finished. There is no other dogma concerning who Christ is and who the Theotokos is. And that is really how we look at it. So what else can we find that would be objectionable today to Orthodox people?
Well, I think when you talk about the sin of Adam, oh my goodness.
That's a big one.
That is a big one, because that has ramifications through our entire theology.
Yeah.
Everything. How we look at salvation, how we look at God. Because, you know, the idea of God in the West, and I run into this all the time, I'm sure you do too, when people, they've been coming from various churches, Roman Catholic and others, you could say even some of the Protestant churches, because they inherited this from Roman Catholicism.
Yeah.
The idea of God is the bad man in the sky, willing to strike you down at any time for anything you do, and not the lover of mankind, not the one that frees us from corruption and sin and death, but someone who is the judge in the sky, so that salvation in other churches actually becomes salvation from God, because God is the problem here, not death and sin and corruption. It's God who is the bad guy, who wants to do something to you because he's offended because you're disobedient, and he has to send his son made of God stuff in order to assuage his wounded pride. It goes on and on.
Oh my God. So let's get into that. Is that called the satisfaction theory of atonement?
Satisfaction theory of atonement.
Explain it a little better and tell us why it's not acceptable and for us, and what is the Orthodox approach to that, and how we look at salvation. Okay?
Well, I think the satisfaction theory amounts to the idea that we have a holy, just God, and that anything that goes against that holiness, one way or the other, is something that has to be atoned for. In other words, he's perfectly holy. When we sin, we somehow offend him. And again, in Orthodoxy, that whole concept of being offended is not even in the Godhead. It's impossible.
It doesn't exist. Yeah.
Right. And so what God has to do in order to make the divine plan work is send someone else that can make sacrifice for all the sins of humanity against him. And in this case, he can't find a human being. That would be impossible. So he has to have someone who is his equal. So he sends his son. So what you basically have is God sending God to be punished so that God's integrity will be restored. And that's much more in alignment with paganism than it is anything the fathers taught. And people I think understand this intuitively because they have problems with it, and they think, well, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's what I've always been taught. That God's there, and Jesus had to go and get not only make satisfaction, but actually get punished. But that's where the breakdown comes with the theologies in the Old Testament, because the sacrifices were never punished. It was not punishment at all. And so this whole idea sort of falls on its face when you really think about it. Because again, it all involves the Godhead. It doesn't involve us, really. It doesn't involve the Lord coming and taking on all the things that are keeping us back and uniting them with his divinity and thereby destroying them.
So this idea of atonement, where punishment has to be extracted, it's very close to the ancient Greek way of the gods of the Greeks, where, if you think about the Greeks going to Troy, and the winds won't blow, and the way for the winds to blow, because Athena was offended, they need to sacrifice the daughter of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek army, so that Athena would be satisfied and be, and we call this, in modern theology in the West, they call it atonement, but the Greeks, they called it something else. It was something that was really a satisfaction. So it's a satisfaction theology.
Satisfaction theology.
And that appeases the God so they can allow the winds to blow. And therefore, what we have in Protestantism is really a parallel, which is not only Protestantism, but Roman Catholicism as well, where we need to appease God by punishing someone so that his justice or his satisfaction would be atoned or whatever, so that
like the scapegoat.
A scapegoat. So we call that propitiation, which is different from the way we look at it, which is about forgiveness only and not about pleasuring God in this way, giving him satisfaction or atoning in that way through a sacrifice of someone and a punishment of someone. Anyway, so I think these theologies developed more later, first in the Roman Catholics and then in the Protestants, who absorbed them and went from one idea to another.
Anselm of Canterbury.
Anselm was the first one.
Was one who really tried to lay the
who
ground.
really laid the groundwork for this concept of atonement, which is really propitiation of God by punishing someone or by killing someone, things like that. So we don't share that. We understand salvation more as healing. And in the Greek, it's actually healing. The word to save, sozo, means to heal, to make wholesome, to restore, to make whole somebody or something. So that's what salvation means. Not, I don't know, what do they
It's not a legal bargain.
It's not the legal bargain where you give to take and somebody's expecting you to do things in that way to barter your life for their life and whatever else.
Right.
It's
right.
God loves man, and he gives his only begotten Son so that he can take our humanity and restore it to a healthy humanity, because he has been broken, he has been sick, he has become unable to function to love God back.
Yes.
And our restoration of our humanity is to be able to love God back even as much as we can do it,
Right.
because we will never be able to love him as much as he loves us, right?
True, true.
So that's a major difference.
Well, it is. I mean, so the Lord comes as, I mean, it's in the Paschal Sermon of St. John Chrysostom and St. Gregory of Nazianzus, talking about how he comes basically as a ransom.
Yeah.
He's coming as a ransom. And it talks, about death, thinking it swallows a man, but it vomits forth God. Because it was, again, the sort of divine trick that was played on death. And, without going too far down that type of imagery, I think it is important to understand that ransoming of us is what frees us from everything. Because Christ takes it on, unites himself with us, and then he takes on all of the things that are holding us back, that are plaguing us.
He took our fallen humanity and he made it perfect.
Restored it.
He restored it and made it sinless, which we couldn't do on our own.
Right.
So that is what really he is doing in the sense of that ransoming. He took our humanity and gave back to us perfection and holiness and eternal life.
All of these things.
Yeah. So the imagery is more imagery, is not theology in the sense of you
Right.
can use it and create theology.
Yes, yes, as an idea.
So what about another issue with which we encounter a little later with Gregory Palamas, and at that time is more clarified and more, which is a concept of created grace, or on the other side, it's the concept of the activities of God, the energies of God, versus his own existence and versus his own essence, and what are they exactly? Are they created? So is it created grace?
Well,
Or is it what? Divine grace?
the West knows only the essence of God. That's it.
In their theology.
Yes, the divine essence, which is absolutely untouchable, except that some, I think it was St. Thomas Aquinas, even felt that you could perhaps attain the vision of God here on earth. He wasn't real clear about it. But because they know only the essence, that left them with the big problem of, well, how does God interact with man?
Yeah.
What does he do? And so this vessel they came up with, we call, and they called first, created grace. In other words, grace is a creature of God, just like we are creatures. It is an intermediary that carries something from God to us, because he is so wholly other, he can't deal with us at all.
He can communicate himself to us.
Not a bit. And so grace is what does this in the West. Of course, in the East, especially with St. Gregory Palamas, who was just rehashing what had already been proclaimed by so many of the fathers. Yes.
Yep.
And he said, well, it's like the sun. And I've always loved this particular imagery. If God is like the sun, we can't know the essence. We'd be consumed if we tried it.
Yeah.
But yet we feel the warmth, we feel the rays of light, it touches us, it ennobles us, it does all these things, and these are God's energies. They are no less God than his essence.
Yeah.
But this is God and how he deals with us, and he does it directly. In other words, it's really God that touches us and not an intermediary of any kind.
So I'm looking at all of these now and I'm wondering what. So in a dialogue, say with the Roman Catholics or any Protestant group for that matter, what is it that the Orthodox can actually, or could they even consider making concessions on these things? Would it be possible to make concessions and yet not affect the faith and not affect the way that we look at salvation, not affect the faith, the way that we look at the Trinity? Would it be possible for us to make any concessions on these things?
There are certain things that possibly could be explained in a different manner. To make a lesser one, for instance, earlier we talked about the celibacy of the clergy, for instance. That is a discipline.
Yeah.
Okay, that is a discipline, and it could be used that way in the West if they so decided, because we actually have that discipline too for our bishops.
Yeah.
So it's not like that's entirely out of bounds. That is something that possibly could be done. The more serious things, for instance, like
stay on that for a moment.
With that. Okay.
But my experience now is that after the big scandals and the exodus of hundreds of thousands, maybe, of priests from the Western Church, from the Catholic Church, they are short with priests. So what are they doing now? Instead of saying, the Church has had married priests all these centuries, why put a harsh discipline like that, and then make it possible for people who are not normal, who are, pedophiles or whatever, enter and do whatever they're doing, and embarrass us, and and put a big stain on the priesthood, on the Roman Catholic priesthood. Instead of doing that, they decided to solve the problem, to patch the problem, by ordaining married deacons. Okay, so it's okay to be married and be a deacon, and then they hand over to the deacons all the sacraments, except for communion,
right,
except for the liturgy.
Right.
So all the sacraments of the Roman Church now, because of the lack of priests, are done by deacons, by married deacons. It's okay to marry people, it's okay to bury people, it's okay to baptize people. The deacons can do all of that.
The deacons can.
But it's not, and they're married, but they cannot ordain priests who are married to do any of those sacraments anymore because they don't have enough. Right. So I think that they're moving it further away from us in that way, because we don't see the deacons as the ones doing sacraments. We see the deacons as assisting the priests to do the sacraments, because the priest is the one who can do the sacraments. So we're going to have to deal with that in a dialogue where we're talking about the priesthood.
Well, we probably would, and of course, in talking about some of the things that the Western deacons do, when you have a topic like marriage, for instance.
Yeah.
In the Western Church, the marriage is basically done by the couple. They are taking vows, and so the deacon is just a witness of those vows. There are no vows in the Orthodox marriage service. It's a series of prayers and blessings that only the priest can do. Baptisms, that's a little stranger to me, how they're allowing baptisms.
Yeah.
Of course, deacons can take Holy Communion to the faithful that are sick, that kind of thing.
Our deacons can do that.
Our deacons can do that, but Eucharistic ministers have been distributing it at the Mass for
lay
years
people,
now. Lay people.
Okay.
Yes. So I think that this priest problem is having a lot of ramifications, not just in the idea of married deacons, but even among the lay people too, in terms of what they're allowed to do.
Yeah.
So that will change. That is something that we would definitely have a problem with, in accommodating ourselves to that idea.
Anyway, so we need to kind of bring these together and say, well, I personally, of all the things that we described, I cannot see anything that the Orthodox can actually compromise in order to make the Roman Catholics say satisfied that that we are coming closer to them. None of these, really. I mean, if you think about it, there is none of these that. How can an Orthodox bishop admit that the Pope is going to be his supervisor, his boss. He's the one that
No.
gives him authority to do anything that he does, like it is now with them. How can an Orthodox bishop accept that one man in Rome will make decisions for the whole church?
Yes.
I don't see any of that happening. I mean, from the bishops I know, which are all good bishops, I don't think of anybody, even if they have the goodwill to dialogue and to do whatever they're doing, to be friends and to be, to find ways to work together, because our people are in countries like the United States. Our people are together. We know many Roman Catholics. They know many Orthodox. So, but how can our bishops actually give in to any of these things and put themselves under the Pope? How any of the patriarchs?
Well, they would be giving up more than they know, I think, because first of all, if they did indeed submit to the Pope, that Pope could depose them the next day if he wanted to.
Absolutely.
He's got that power because he makes all the decisions about the bishops. He is the one that appoints all of the bishops.
So would any of our bishops actually agree to this?
It's hard to believe that.
It's hard to believe. I read in a newspaper in Cyprus that the Archbishop of Cyprus was making some comments. He says there is no way for us to do this. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how you could.
Trying to calm people who are saying, oh, we're going to be united with the Pope and our bishops are giving in. And he says, who said that?
It's a wonderful thought.
Yeah.
And we would never say never, because of course with God all things are possible.
Yep.
But in terms of probable, it's not looking very promising, I think, on the world stage, because there's just too much to overcome. And we've just touched on some of the high-level doctrinal things.
Yeah.
We didn't dig at all into the spiritual ramifications that have flooded the Roman Catholic Church for the last 1,000 years. The way they pray, which is in many cases totally contrary to the way of the Holy Fathers. I mean, it's something that we just would not be able to unearth and correct. And neither, I think, if this happened, would we probably be required to do so, which is one of the scarier things about it.
Yeah.
Because there's just too many things that are going on in the Roman Catholic Church in terms of their own spirituality and how they think about God and how they use imagery in their prayer and things like this that's just absolutely contrary to what the fathers of the church say. So it's something even much, much deeper than just these macro level things that we're talking about.
But about afterlife and indulgences. Indulgence is what created the entire evolution of the Protestants. Did the Roman Catholics give up on indulgences?
No.
No, they have not?
No.
Yeah.
Was it Johann Tetzel walking around, when the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from the purgatory springs? This whole sort of thing when they were trying to collect money to build the Vatican.
Yeah.
But the whole theology behind that is also completely skewed.
And it's still there, though.
It is still there.
They have not given up. They do it maybe not by asking money, but they do it in other ways through the requirements, again, that they have, that you need to be in church 3 times a month, or that you need to do this and the other thing to satisfy, again, a requirement which is really like indulgences. And,
a legal requirement.
Yeah, legal requirements.
Yeah.
And then for the people who passed on, again, and the idea of the purgatory, and that you can actually pay your way in some ways, and I don't know which ways they have now, but in some ways you need to pay for the sins of the people who died so that they will spend less time in purgatory. And purgatory is something that the Orthodox never developed and never accepted.
They have Jubilee years where if you go to certain places, you go to make a pilgrimage to Rome or something, you're granted a certain number of indulgences.
Still to this day?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely, that's done. And then there's the vexed question that I think that, I know that you and I have discussed before about Mary. Did Mary die? I was looking just recently in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, I've got one of the original copies. I don't know if they've changed it since then. But it's very interesting because the wording says, when she had completed the course of her earthly life, is what it says. Then they quote the Orthodox Trisagion of the Dormition, which talks about her falling asleep. But of course, in the Orthodox Church, when we're talking about falling asleep, we all know what it means.
Yep.
It means death.
Yep.
Does it mean the same thing when it's being quoted by the Roman Catholics in their catechism? Does it mean just fell asleep and then somehow was translated to heaven? I don't know.
So is that the dogma that was created in the 50s then?
That was the
background of that.
the background,
Yeah.
yeah, you could say, of that.
Okay.
So, and it's all tied together too. All of their Marian dogmas are kind of tied together too.
Falling asleep for us is really a common term that we use for everybody. And even the cemeteries, the word cemetery in English is skimiterion in Greek, which means the place where people are asleep. So it's not used for the Virgin Mary primarily and exclusively. It's used for everybody. All of us in the end fall asleep in the Lord, and that means we die and we're buried.
And I think their actual dogma from 1950 about the Assumption doesn't specifically mention that. It just means at the end of her life she was translated.
Yeah.
But what does the end of life mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and there are people that I know from older sources I've seen, like from the early 20th century, that flat out say that she did not die.
Okay.
But whether that's dogmatic now, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's kind of conclude and summarize a little bit. And the way I'm looking at this, having the experience of, or looking rather at the experience of the rapprochement and the dialogue that has gone on for many years, even though I've seen from our side people were willing to compromise in some ways, but not necessarily in a big theological way, I have not really seen any compromise from the Vatican about any of these. So if they're not willing to step down from all of that and kind of pull away from all of that, I don't know if there will be any progress in this dialogue toward union.
I don't see how there could be. The closest thing I think that I can remember is a number of years back when Pope John Paul II went and saw the Archbishop of Athens. And he apologized for all of the rotten things that the West had done to the Orthodox over the years. But that, as nice as that was, and as good as that was not any kind of doctrinal consideration on their part that they were somehow willing to change anything.
Yeah, but you know, when you apologize about something, and I offended you in some way, and I come back and I apologize to you, that means I will never offend you again. And I undo what I did. So if you apologized about the wrong things that they did were based on wrong theology and the primacy of the Pope and all of these other things that they did through the Jesuits, primarily during the years under the Muslims when they were trying to make them Orthodox by stirring up all kinds of things within the Orthodox Church, which was under the Muslims. And in fact, at some point, even the Muslim emperor, Constantinople, banned the Jesuits from his territories because of all the confusion they were creating. So if they apologize about all that, they need to change their theology and their ecclesiology, which allows them to do things like that.
Right.
But yet, instead of doing that, they might apologize, but they still go, say, to Romania or Ukraine, which is burning now. They still go to these countries and they try to convert the Orthodox by dressing up like the Orthodox and pretending to be Orthodox when they're actually not Orthodox, and they're creating churches and they absorb the people of the area into their churches, and then they claim that they have Orthodox under them,
And all that is necessary is to recognize the Pope.
Yeah, and all that is necessary to recognize the Pope. The priests can be married, the people can say whatever they want, they can do whatever they want, but as long as they're under the Pope. So to me that shows that that idea of the primacy of the Pope is so deeply ingrained in Western theology, in Roman Catholic theology that they can't give it up when they're willing to do things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And in a dialogue, what are they going to discuss? What are they going to actually compromise on? Anything else that they compromise on won't make any difference.
Well, and you think about what have they discussed actually. I mean, there was that document on baptism, Eucharist, ministry, this sort of thing. We have these conferences with them, and we talk about these different things and similarities and what do we have in common and all this sort of thing. But it doesn't go anywhere because it can't go anywhere. That's the whole thing. You're always going to run up against the wall of the papacy. And the papacy today, particularly, is stronger than it's ever been.
Yep.
It's basically a creation of the modern world, the techno world that we live in, starting even back in 1870, which is when the Industrial Revolution was going full steam, and we've now moved into multimedia, and the Pope is a worldwide kind of phenomenon, emperor. He's everywhere. He does all these different
political,
things. Absolutely.
religious, and economic.
Yeah, so that everyone in the West, even if you're not Roman Catholic, has to deal with him one way or the other.
Which brings us to the idea of the political position of the Bishop of Rome, which clergy in the Orthodox Church are completely banished from anything that has to do with political positions.
Right.
And they're not forbidden. And as soon as they get into that, they will be removed from their place as clergy. So, and then you have the Bishop of Rome, who is a political leader and has his own state.
His own state, right.
And has his own banks and has his own way of doing politics. And and the Vatican is a member of the United Nations, member state. And they have embassies around the world, many countries. So, I don't know. I don't have any hope that they will actually give up on the things that we would like them to give up as Orthodox. And I don't see anybody on the Orthodox side, any bishop actually, that will actually put himself under the authority of the Bishop of Rome and say, I accept everything you claim, and here I am, I'm going to serve you.
I don't either.
Yeah.
It's sometimes I think our own bishops may get lured into playing games with the Roman Catholics. They go to conferences and they talk, and there are many, many things that we could agree with the Roman Catholics about in terms of the function of faith in the modern world, and if they're getting persecuted somewhere, we would certainly speak out against that, and they do the same for us, and that's common cause, but yet you could do that with every religion, really, that is getting persecuted. But the way that the Roman Catholics work, it's such a top-down enterprise, which is inverted from the way Orthodox theology works. We are bottom up. The bishop and the local congregation is the universal church. For them, it has to be all-encompassing in order to be universal.
The papacy.
Under the papacy, exactly.
So in other words, we conclude in a very pessimistic kind of conclusion that it's going to be very difficult to get either the Roman Catholics to give up on the things that they claim, or the Orthodox to give in to that so that they unite with the Roman Catholics. And that is really a sad thing in the sense that, at least in our lifetime, I don't see that there will be union between the two. But even going forward, there have to be many concessions, either from the one or the other, which is very difficult to bring about in order to bring the two into intercommunion and unity as it should be, as it used to be, going all the way back to the earlier centuries before Charlemagne and before the split, the vision.
I think in the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil, we say, reconcile and unite them to the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
That's right.
That should be our concentration. That should be our prayer. And God will work out whatever God deems necessary to work out.
Well, in the end, we surrender everything into the hands of God because we have no choice. We are His, the church is His church, and whatever church He preserves, whatever truth He preserves, He would preserve it the way He understands And all we need to do is a little think about what we are able to do in our own little circle where we are. So thank you for listening to us, and may God bless you. And I hope we didn't disappoint some, and I hope we satisfied some, and I hope that this will be a good reference point to come to whenever the question is raised. Thank you.